Cold beer. All right, so DEFER,
Yes, sir.
welcome to the Museum of Graffiti's podcast.
Thank you very much. Great to be back.
Yes, I'm
Yeah.
happy to see you again.
Full circle.
That's right, right back in the old building.
Yep, exactly.
Got your mural up in effect
right
still.
there. Me, John 1 right there.
That's right.
Yeah,
So I'll welcome everybody to the Museum of Graffiti's podcast. Here we share oral histories from writers from around the world that have made an impact in the graffiti movement. This podcast is brought to you by our good friends at Modelo Beer. Thank you for the support. And so definitely we want to get into your history, a little bit of your story. I know we're going to go down
Memory lane.
Memory lane.
Yeah, for sure.
Go way back. So can you remember the first time you ever picked up a can of spray paint?
Absolutely. Yeah. So basically, obviously, like in the West Coast, we weren't exposed to like the styles and stuff that were from New York and the East Coast. You know what I mean? In terms of ornate pieces. But we did have a heavy gang culture, which was Old English, blocks, and, I was exposed to that just in my neighborhood in Boyle Heights. So I saw that. And then also there was cultural murals, too, by like the East LA Streetscapers, Willie Head-On. They were doing more cultural, socio-political murals, but, as when I was doing breakdancing, like one of my homies told me, hey, there's going to be a documentary about breaking. It's called Style Wars. So it was on Channel 28, which is public broadcasting network. Wasn't one of the main channels, but so I watched it, and it's kind of fuzzy too because it was on a regular TV and it was on Channel 28, so it wasn't as clear as the other channels. And I was like, wow, man, it was about graffiti, but I used to draw too as a kid, and mess around with just the styles I saw in my neighborhood, but it wasn't nothing artistic really. And then, but when I gravitated towards the graph, I was like, whoa, that's crazy. So, first thing right after the show, I started sketching like b-boy characters and, fresh, def, hip hop, like real whack, but just kind of emulating what I saw in that glimmer of graffiti. So I was just like, all right, cool. And then went back to school the next day. They were like, man, that movie was boring. They didn't even show breakdancing. They only showed a little bit because everybody breakdancing was big back then, but it was more. So I was like on the opposite spectrum of it. I was like, man, that was dope. You just introduced me to graffiti, to graph, without me, knowing. And then, so that opened my eyes to it. And I was just doing sketches and stuff. And then me and that same friend, Sight from KGB, his mom used to take us places. He's like, yeah, let's go check out this movie called Wild Style. And it was playing in one theater. Nobody was in the theater. We checked it out. You know what I mean? It was just like, whoa. And it was about, it was more about graph also. So, right after that, I got some cans. And then in my backyard, there was a wall. And I just destroyed it. I mean, it was bad, though. I think I wrote Wild Style. And the album cover too, Wild Style album cover. I think I bit, and try to emulate those letters. Yeah. So that was 1983, and then obviously I remember breakdancing started dying in '84, and I actually right after that I did a piece off the freeway, and I did it the opposite way. I did the outline first, filled it in after, and the paint just sucked into the wall. Real whack,
What did it say?
It said Chaos 2, because I bit that name from a book, a hip hop book.
Okay.
I saw Chaos. I was like, that got to be the baddest name ever. You know what I mean? Because it's like chaotic, chaos. So I put Chaos. I didn't know nothing about biting or anything like that, but just emulating, right? So that was like my first graph name. And then I would say maybe 6 months after that, Shandu and these dudes, they burned me. Riding the school bus, they were like, man, you just got burned. I was like, what do you mean I got burned? And then I was like, whoa, I was just blown away. It was Shandu, Crime, and they did some pieces up there. They hit all the bridges. I was like, man, these dudes, that was LA Bomb Squad.
Okay. Wait, so when you say that, you mean, but they didn't paint near you? Just the fact that they did it.
Yeah, just no, they painted on the same wall.
Oh.
I'm gonna say they even went over me.
Oh shit.
Yeah, but I mean, it was just blew me away because I was like, whoa, that was like leaps and bounds of what I was doing. So I was actually impressed. I was like, wow, that's incredible. And then so after that, I ended up meeting like Rick on the bus. You know what I mean? Like in 80.
Rick meaning crime.
Crime. I met him on the bus, and I was like, because, you know, there was no internet or nothing, so everything was like folklore. You know what I mean? Like, oh, this dude's this, and, you know, and then I met him on the bus, and I was like, yeah, you know, so, you know, I think we exchanged numbers or whatever, and I was just more like, oh, shoot, I met crime, you know, Rick. And then it was strange because I knew Prime from school, but he wasn't a writer yet. So then I kind of had to backtrack. You went to this school too? And he was like, yeah, because I remembered him, but I didn't remember him as a graffiti writer.
And so were these guys from your neighborhood or something that you were on the same bus, or how did that happen?
Well, Rick was more. I met Rick at Marshall High School, but it was a high school, but he was actually older than me. But summer school, when you're young, you can go there too. It was like So my aunt lived by Marshall, which was Silver Lake area. So I actually went there because she used to babysit me back in the day. After school, I'd go over to my cousin's house, and that's how I got into that school. That's where I met Rick. So they were kind of from Belmont. I was from Boyle Heights at the time. You know, then my house caught on fire, so then I moved further east towards Monterey Park. You know, so which was about 15, 20 minutes away from downtown.
So this is happening. It's 1983. How old were you at the time?
Actually, this was 84.
Okay.
84 turning into 85.
Okay. I mean, you were a teenager.
Yeah, teenager.
About how old?
Yeah, like, I don't know, 14.
So before that, you were breaking.
Yeah.
Was it in school, or, you know, where were people getting together?
Oh, in school. Then we go to Hollywood Boulevard, and it got so bad to where the cops would get people for curfew. You know, if you were it was weird. It was just like, yeah, let these kids dance, but they would get you for curfew, and, you know, we'd go to Hollywood Boulevard and different places, this park called Hollenbeck Park near my house. They had like a band shell.
Okay.
We used to go to MacArthur Park too, and break dance over there, and Radiotron, but it was called the Radio Club back then.
Okay, and did they have like all age parties or
Yeah, they did.
parties?
Yeah, they did have all age parties back then.
So what was I've heard about Radiotron or Club Radio in the past.
Yeah.
What was that?
Oh man, it was this guy Carmelo actually took it over after. I'm not sure who owned it at the time, but it was a small, tiny club on Parkview by MacArthur Park, and I mean it was crazy because back then they had like Ice Cube played there, you know what I mean, him and the Wrecking Crew. I think Run DMC played there, but I wasn't there that night. You know what I mean? But they had some pretty good.
I've heard Ice-T talk about it. And
Yeah, for sure. He was kind of a regular there. He was
Yeah.
a regular, like almost like he was a regular there. Him and the Glove, he was a DJ. So yeah, they were there, and then they had there was a lot of concerts like the Fresh Festival. Long Beach Fresh Festival, which, you know, Keith Haring did all the artwork.
Yep.
They had Swatch watches. You remember those days, right?
Yeah, that was a big deal.
They had, World on Wheels. Yeah, because the school I went to was called CES, which was on the west side. It was a magnet school. And we used to go to PE for World on Wheels. You know, like you can go skating and, you know, and they had arcade games and stuff. But then on Saturday nights, Fridays and Saturday nights, it was like a club. So they basically, it was crazy. Like New Edition played there.
So crazy.
And that guy, Ralph Tresvant, he got hit by a Crip because he was singing to this dude's girl, and dude got jealous and socked him, and they had to stop the concert.
Crazy.
But I mean, that's how it was. I
Yeah.
mean, people, that was like R&B, hip hop. And, you
I
know.
think Africa Islam might have been down with that as well, from what I remember.
Yeah,
and it was
a
the
lot of people went
spot.
through.
It
Yeah.
was the
Yeah.
premier
Yeah.
rap hip hop club at the time in Los Angeles. From
Yeah,
what
yeah.
I remember.
Radiotron, yeah, for sure. So there was a lot of people that went through there.
And you mentioned you were originally from Boyle Heights.
Yeah.
So what was Boyle Heights like growing up as a teenager?
It was, you know, as a kid, it was kind of dicey because like gangs were kind of maybe I would say dying out at that time because it was like a lot of drug use took out that generation. So it was like you saw the writing everywhere, but you didn't see the people. It was kind of mysterious.
That's pretty strange.
So
huh?
they would tell you, yeah, like don't walk at the park at night because these dudes from Third will come out and kidnap you and butcher you. You know, myth. You know what I
Right.
mean? But you didn't really you see them here and there, but you didn't see it like deep at that time. But then when I was going to school, I would see a lot of gangs like 18th Street and Playboys. They would be deep. They'd mob on the streets, have big murals. So I saw it a little more on the west side. And then the east side, like a lot of the guys that became gang members, they were into hip hop at that time. You know, they were all into breaking. Was huge. I mean, that was kind of the phenomenon for young people, right?
And was that because of the film Breaking and some of the other stuff? Or, I mean, how did it reach there? Do you remember?
Oh, yeah. They actually filmed Breaking Part 2 in Boyle Heights at All Nations. That was a club in Boyle Heights, too.
But there was really important, famous dancers from L.A.
Yeah, for sure.
You mentioned Shandu.
Yeah, I mean, Shandu was a graph writer, but we had, at the Radiotron, we had Shake City Rockers.
Okay.
Orko, Little Caesar.
That's right.
Those guys were incredible. And then Oz Rock, rest in peace.
That's right.
Oz Rock was from New York, and then he was one of my mentors too.
Yeah, he moved down to Miami for a while.
Yeah, he moved to Miami after he moved to LA, actually. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, he came down and he used to do graph too. He was in a movie called The Pilot.
Okay.
It's called The Pilot, about some girl that was breakdancing and stuff like that. And he came out in a few shows and stuff like that. But Oz Rock was a character, you know what I mean?
Was he the cat that got sponsored? Like he had like some kind of like athletic deal or something? Like he was really sort of like that dude in Hollywood, or
yeah, because he'd come out and I forgot which movies, but he'd get these parts in movies and stuff like that. And the realistic, like now you look back at it, he wasn't making too much money. He had a little spot. He had this girlfriend that was pregnant, and then breaking was kind of dying out also, like as a fad. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but he had the dopest handstyles, Oz Rock, and he kind of showed us that he was like a all front hip hop dude. He used to beatbox. He's one of those guys that knew everything,
Renaissance man.
Renaissance hip hop guy. So he knew how to write.
It's kind of incredible to meet some of these early pioneers.
Yeah, for sure.
Especially in those days, and
yeah,
it's just starting to hit in LA that way.
Yeah, and another big influence at the time was Soon, Sun One Soon.
Yep.
Yeah, he was him and Legit. Legit did more hand styles, but Soon did the pieces, and he was the first one we saw use like a the black dot tips. We're like, wow, those are so but no, you can get those from the little tester cans. That you just paint models with. You know what I mean? So they're little tricks of the trade, and we're like, so we started using those.
So Soon was from New York.
New York, yeah, New Yorker. Yeah.
One of the few cats that ended up moving out there like Oz Rock.
Yeah, and it was crazy because I was like a little kid, and I looked like a little kid back then, and he was like a man. Soon just like whatever we thought was cool, he was doing it 100 times better. It's like, yo, I'll walk in and I'll just rack 100 cans with the trench coat, and you're just like taking 3 cans each or whatever. So he was magnified, you know what I mean? And I met him at Pan Pacific Park.
Okay.
He was painting with Risky at the time.
And what was Pan Pacific Park?
Oh, that was another big, it was actually an abandoned theater that caught fire, an old classic theater on the west side. And then, but then this guy, Jim, he took it over, I guess started managing it and let people do graph there. Because people were kind of just sneaking in doing graph. And then after he started just letting, just go in there because they're gonna rent it. I guess they were gonna demo it anyways because it was damaged.
Right.
So he would let people go in there and paint, after a while. Yeah.
So you end up linking up with these guys. You meet Rick.
Yeah.
You meet other writers at the time.
Yeah.
When did you, or how did you start to develop your style or the style that you were doing back then?
Yeah. So it was crazy because our style was kind of a mixture of like the Chicano blocks and stuff like that you would see. And then that's kind of what I had, like a dual influence. I saw that. And then, one thing I did notice, I wasn't as good in the New York styles, were very, ornate and twisting arrows. So I think what was a weakness for me became a strength because I wasn't good at that. So my style didn't look like everybody else's, more geometrical.
Yes,
so instead of like doing the whips and everything, I would just do a lot of clean cuts, and it would look blocky.
Yeah.
So it was easier for me, but I think at that time, now people look back, well, that was innovative. But it was born out of a weakness to me. That's the way I saw it.
Pretty wild. I mean, it was a very, very distinct and you
Yeah,
need sort of
exactly.
big, chunky block style
Yeah.
with sharp edges.
Yeah.
I had never seen a style like that before until I went to Los Angeles.
Yeah, so because Gio used to do a lot of blocks, and I was kind of like in the middle of Gio and Rick, because I would try to do what Rick was doing, but he was like leaps and bounds ahead of everybody. Natural artist, he'd just pick up a can, and he could just freestyle something. I would be more nervous, and like always panicking out, when I paint,
Right, trying to maybe be perfect.
Yeah,
With what you're doing.
And then you had Charlie and Dante and those guys.
That's right.
Those guys are hip hop to the bone too. Charlie, you know what I mean?
The DTK crew.
DTK crew, yeah. He took me to some, my first hip hop concerts and stuff like that, because they had bugs too. They had clean bugs back in the day.
Yeah, that's right.
I remember they had bugs.
Yes.
They were ahead of time.
They were.
had these clean bugs. Like they pull up to Belmont, and Charlie's just like the nicest dude. You know what I mean? Kind of like a big brother figure. You know what I mean? And he was ahead of everything. He was documenting stuff, taking pictures like with a legit camera.
Yes.
We had like these disposable fake.
Well, he
cameras.
had that. He had the gazelles.
All that, yeah.
Right? He was,
organized.
straight hip hop dude, organized,
Yeah.
and also a couple of years older.
Yeah. But
So
he had a car. He was an organized dude. Had a job. You know what I'm saying? And we were just more like little hoodlums. Well, Graph. It comes from the streets, so we weren't organized at all. It was like in the midst of chaos, right?
Yeah, Charlie had a good connect to New York as well.
Oh yeah.
Because he had started traveling.
Yeah.
And I guess he had met Notch 56.
Notch 56.
And
yeah.
went to the Bronx
Yeah.
and then met Henry. And so he had this
Yeah.
view of writing from New York and seeing all these different styles, and came back.
Yeah.
And then,
Oh,
Geo, and, he credits people like Blinky
Yeah.
and Sky and all these other guys.
Yeah.
Genius
Yeah. Genius. Yeah.
also, yeah.
Yeah. So it was crazy about Notch too, because my boy Skepta was the one that actually met him first.
Okay.
He went to New York for breaking, and then I think Ozrock hooked him up, but he met Notch in a club. He said Notch was like some low-key dude, you know what I mean? Like in the corner, had his hoodie up, and just like, yo, I'm Notch, real quiet, and he was like, yeah, let's go paint, and, took him around, and that's when, like, Skip had a bunch of pictures of Notch's work. I was blown away, man. That guy was, like, so dope.
Incredible talent.
And the name is dope, too, like Notch. You know what I mean? Like a dope name. Notch
And Skept also.
Yeah, Skept, yeah. Skept, yeah, he was definitely a LAOG and originator. Yeah, leaps and bounds ahead of a lot of people.
So when we talk about those old days, you mentioned these names. We're talking early mid '80s.
Yeah, mid '80s.
Right,
yeah.
and there were so many different styles out of LA. There was these skinny to fat letters that I
Yeah.
remember, kind of maybe Skept and Charlie.
Yeah.
There was the chunky styles that you were doing, and others. It was just, for me going there for the first time and seeing that stuff, or seeing things like Ghetto Art magazine that Charlie
Yeah.
started,
Yeah, Charlie.
and starting to see these photos come out of LA. You guys had your own thing going on. It was very special and very unique.
Yeah, and also I think it was like we didn't have access to seeing a lot of things. Someone had to go to New York and bring pictures back, because there was no internet, no YouTube, no nothing back then, So everything was like whoever had pictures. Like if you went to New York, and I never went to New York back then, so I only got to see what people had in their albums and stuff like that did get to go there,
So you see Style Wars, you see Wild Style, highly influential. You start painting, you meet all these guys, you start to develop, your own look and feel.
Yeah,
right? This
absolutely.
sort of this
Yeah.
hybrid of, let's
Yeah.
say, these street gang blocks,
Yeah.
and what you maybe saw in Style Wars,
Yeah.
or maybe even, I don't know if you got to see that book Subway Art.
Oh yeah.
That came
Somewhere,
out back then,
Definitely. Yeah. That was like a Bible back then for us,
Kind of incredible to
Oh,
be able to see that,
Yeah.
and then apply it, but flip it in your own way.
Yeah.
Which I think
yeah.
was a really special thing, that
Yeah.
LA, although they were doing what, you guys were doing something that I hear guys call New York style.
Yeah.
It was an LA version of New York style, because you guys had
Yeah, for
different color paint.
Yeah.
You guys were using just had different,
Yeah.
a different approach.
Yeah, definitely. So it was, I think from there on, LA style kind of got its own distinct flavor, You know, because Soon had a big influence on a lot of people. Then they had the West Coast artists, was Risky and those guys, and they kind of had more like an East Coast flavor in their style. You know, they had a lot of arrows and flips, and you know, we called them coins of 3Ds and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I think our style became more geometric. And then some of our characters, we referenced them from other things like I remember in New York they'd have Bombo Day and stuff like that, very popular. You know what I mean? The Cheech Wizard and all that.
Yes.
You know, and then we had the Cerebus. We got that character.
That's right. I remember that character.
With that. We're like, yeah, we got the Cerebus. This is our K2S mascot.
So tell me a little bit about K2S. What was that crew, and who was in the crew?
Yeah, it started like in the end of '84. The concept of it, and it was Kill to Succeed. Rick started it, and he wanted it to be 5 Alive in '85, so 5 members: me, Gio, Prime, Rick. Yeah.
And so Kill to Succeed '85, it still exists as a crew today.
Yeah, we're still strong, man. We're here.
More than 5 people now.
Oh yeah, we got people all over the world pretty much now.
So how did you guys go from a small local crew to a crew that's held on for so many years? I mean, I think it's a pretty rare thing.
Yeah, I think what it was we, you know, a couple guys recruited. Rick still hung on, and he recruited. You know, I kind of got lost in another world, you know, so I was kind of out of the loop for a while. I was always there, but not there, you know. And thankfully that these guys recruited a few guys, and they recruited a couple other guys. And then when I kind of got back into art and stuff like that, I recruited a few guys, and you know, we got dudes like Copy, and he's kind of known worldwide, and he has this crew called Bamsey, and some of those guys like got grafted in also to our crew.
All right, so new, fresh blood.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of talent. You know,
Yeah.
to me, it's rare
Yeah.
to see crews that have been around for so long. You know, there's like every city has a few, but it's a pretty rare thing. So it's nice to see a crew that has this legacy.
Yeah.
Still alive.
And then we pushed in, and we got some new members in. Yeah.
So I love that. You know, before you were mentioning, you know, Boyle Heights.
Yeah.
And some of the wall writing, whether, I don't know, the crews, the Playboys that you might have seen as you're going towards the west side. Or,
yeah.
How did that, did that have an impact beyond the blocks in your work?
Yeah, for sure, because I think one thing, I always had a hard time doing throwies and stuff like that. Just you know, some people is like, you know, you see Cap do a throwy, it's so fluid, and for some reason, I would have this more inclination to do blocks, and I think it was me being a little kid emulating those neighborhood blocks, Old English. You know what I mean? 'Cause
Yeah.
it's more rigid.
It's angular.
So for me, flipping to like a throwy was hard because I think my hand was more like up and down cuts, you know, like that. So I think that in retrospect, I'm
Right.
thinking about that, you know. But therefore, I think it was harder for me to get fluid on like things like throwaways. Even a hand style is kind of like, I would kind of have a hybrid of a neighborhood style. And like,
I mean, your tag is a bit like that, but it wasn't always like that, right? Your style has changed from the 80s till today, or is it still
yeah, for sure it changed. I mean, I think I'm more known now for calligraphic styles and what I call spiritual language, which is obliterating the letter form. So I think I'm more known for that now. But I mean, and I think, but I think my hand style was always hybrid at that time, because even when I did like my style, people used to thought it was PEF, like PE, like I do a D that was real shrunken, and then a big loopy E and an F, and people were like, oh, I thought that was PEF 1. I'm like, no, it's Def 1. So that's what I'm saying. So some of the letters I struggled with, you know what I mean?
So Def 1,
Yeah.
it sounds very hip hop.
Oh yeah, they thought that was dephone.
Default.
dephone, and yeah, you're dephone. All that.
No, to me it sounds like.
Oh,
I mean,
hip-hop for
people used to
sure.
say deaf.
Deaf,
That's
for
deaf.
sure.
That's deaf. So
Yeah.
you just took the word instead of fresh.
That's how.
you used deaf.
That's how back.
That's
the name
how-
goes,
that's
'cause
how
it's-
old school you are.
That's yeah. That's what I mean. It was
Are
like
you wearing Pumas?
the Puma suits and all that. Yeah, that's where it comes from.
But it's
That's
kind
what
of like almost from that b-boy era that we're talking
that's
about.
what it is. And then it was almost like the names started getting really, like, there was a lot of cool names that came out of LA because they were trying to differentiate from New York. And I was like thinking about changing my name too, because I was like, everybody thinks I'm Pef1 or Dephone and this and that. And I was just like, yeah. And then but then everybody started calling me Def. Like it rang, like Def. And then when people started adding the ER, it just helped me out because you have a short name like Ket 2, you want to add maybe Ket 1 or Ket,
Yeah.
whatever numbers, because it's like, you want to add more style, make it a little more, at least 5 or 6 letters, right? Not too long, but not too short. So yeah, so therefore I had, DEFER, and I like the R too, because that's a cool letter to kind of flip,
Yeah.
And
So when you were originally thinking about names and you locked in on deaf, did the letters matter, or was it like the meaning or the word?
yeah, you know what? I was so young, man. At that time.
Wasn't even thought about.
Yeah, it wasn't really like I sat there and thought about it. It was just like and it was like in LA, graffiti was so like incognito that it wasn't popular. It wasn't anything. They were just like people, there was no recognition, no nothing. You know what I mean? So
I mean, it wasn't a good thing.
it wasn't a good thing. Yeah, it was a crime, right? So it wasn't like you doing this, you're gonna get some chicks or you're gonna get paid or nothing. You know what I mean? It was straight. You're gonna
None of that.
catch a case or something, right?
So how did your family put up with this, or how did your family react? Your mother,
They were
whoever's
actually
around?
pretty supportive of me doing graph. I mean, for whatever reason, they thought it was pretty nice. Like, they would see the drawings and stuff, thought it was cool, and then they came and watched me paint a couple walls back then. I didn't even want them to come, but they pulled up. It was just kind of embarrassing. Yeah, your parents are here, like. You know what I mean?
That's
But
pretty amazing, though, that
not-
you
yeah.
had that support.
Yeah, that support. So, and then, I think it was because of, like, my mom was very, politically active and stuff like that on oppression against Japanese Americans and stuff like that. So she was probably maybe more open to, like, subculture and stuff like that, anti-systematic,
Sure.
rebellious.
Sure. I mean, she had to be if she was protesting.
Yeah. So, and, back then, a lot of those movements were grassroots. So they were, and then they really people were really being oppressed back then. So, I think it was easy for my mom to kind of gravitate towards, oh yeah, my son's into this rebellious art form. And I never asked her about it, but it seems like that nowadays,
That's pretty cool.
because it's crazy because my mom's suffering from Alzheimer's disease, dementia, but
Oh.
it's crazy. So she'll like, let me see your artwork, and she could read the most wildest stuff. So I'm like, did something flip in her brain? I'm like, how'd you, like, she's like, that says Killer B, and I'm like, oh wait,
Wow.
how'd you know that? You know what I mean?
Wow, that's very, very cool.
Yeah, so it's almost like savant stuff, So I don't know, but yeah, it's crazy.
So speaking of like this legible stuff or this transition, when did you transition into this more commission art stuff, and was it an easy thing for you to move into that direction? Because you go from someone that's tagging and bombing to maybe doing legal walls, but then all of a sudden, did you move into commission murals ever, or were you somewhere else with it? Now you're known for it, but was it?
Yeah.
Did you take a break before that, or did it flow right into that?
No, so what happened with a lot of the artwork, I got into my neighborhood and stuff like that, and that was pretty intense, and it's very very destructive era in my life, and then
By that you're talking about gang culture.
yeah, all that, you know what I mean. So that's very it's a different world. I'm not really going to touch on that, but that's an abyss, like a vicious cycle. You fall into these cycles, and they're hard to get out of. You know what I mean? But one thing that helped me is I decided to go to school again. I started going to community college just to rebuild my life and stuff like that. So I took some art classes for fun. You know what I mean? So I started learning about art history, and it was boring and stuff. But
So wait a minute. You went back to school, but you weren't planning on going back to school for art.
no, not at all.
That's
at all.
wild.
Not at all.
So you discovered it just by chance again.
Well, I mean, because I had a natural inclination for art, but I wasn't thinking about, oh yeah, I'm gonna major in art or anything like that. So, because I was more into like sociology and stuff like that, because I was into like culture, and I wanted to like maybe be a counselor or something like that, because I had got into a lot of trouble and stuff like that, and I wanted to kind of like maybe I understood that, and then so I was reading voraciously too at the time too, so I kind of was like I was kind of more leaning towards psychology, sociology type, human behavior type stuff, and then as elective I would take art classes, and then this and I remember I was in Santa Monica College, and this art I was doing the the regular run of the mill assignments and stuff like that, and our teacher was like, man, this is pretty good stuff, man. He's like, well, you trying to major in art? I was like, nah, I'm not, I'm just doing it for fun, And he kind of mentored me, this guy named Ron Davis in Santa Monica College. He goes, man, I think you got a shot, bro. And he goes, I don't tell that to a lot of people. I see a lot of students coming in, and he goes, you could probably make something, and then
Shout out to Ron Davis.
Yeah, Ron Davis. Yeah, and then I transferred to Cal State Northridge. I tried to get in UCLA, didn't get in UCLA, and didn't get into a few other schools. But I went to Cal State Northridge after I transferred in. And then this lady named Samantha Fields, she mentored me too. She's like, oh, I think you got a chance. You know what I mean? Like, and she kind of mentored me in fine art, like having context in what you do, what's the meaning of it, what's the purpose of it, historical context, where does it stand in this test of time? Yeah, this is graffiti, but then this is something else. It's evolving into something else.
Right, and where do you fit in history? Art
Exactly,
history.
yeah, exactly. So you have these roots, but they're also coming in from these roots too. So, so we had, I got into some rigorous training about how to write about art, how to study art, how to articulate myself about my art. So a lot of the critiques and stuff like that, she mentored me on how to speak on my art and really dig deep into where it's coming from, where it's going, what it means, so that's kind of how the career got born.
Amazing.
And then it's crazy because when you start putting everything into that context, it's difficult because we're coming from such a primal world of graph politics of we got the thug out there too, right? Just to survive, because we're out there late at night. It's a different, it's the nature of the beast, right? You know what I mean? And then to kind of tame that beast a little bit, but keep the work ethic and blend it into articulating it intellectually, within the art world, it's just kind of like this wild mix.
Well, it sounds like you have to go through some healing,
Sure, yeah.
and also there's a lot of reinvention.
Yeah, definitely. So there's like a lot of reinvention, a lot of a lot of healing, a lot of there was doors that I hadn't closed on addiction and stuff like that I had to address. Sometimes you got to hit rock bottom and different things, and because that's one thing I realized. Graffiti is the nature of the beast. You know that, right?
It's a street. It's a street movement.
Yeah,
You're in the streets.
I mean, literally, we know people that died for it, right? I mean, that
Too many.
you don't die for like, you know what I mean? Like, we know too many people that died, got hit by trains, got killed on the streets, got lit up while they were doing graph, so we've seen a lot of tragic stories. So, it's a lot of it is turning, tragedy into triumph too,
Yeah, because ultimately, those of us that are still around,
Yeah.
Someone like yourself, you're a survivor. You
Yeah,
survived, so many years of being in the streets,
Yeah, yeah,
involved in street activity, including
Yeah.
graffiti, that now
Yeah.
you can look back at it and say, okay, I made it, but that journey from then till today, it's a long journey.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. And then that's kind of where, and it was crazy because I remember where my calligraphic style was born, because I started selling a few pieces to this guy named Tommy. He was actually a New York collector, Tommy Marin. And
Okay.
you probably met him, but he kind
Who's the
of
video guy? The big
yeah,
dude?
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
Big, hey, what's up? You know,
I
look
remember
like
that
the
guy.
Hulk, yeah, with the flat top. He'd be like, I want these cholo styles, and he used to pay cash, So I was like, man, I was like, all right, cool. I was newly married, so I was just like, yeah, let's run it, I need some cash. So he would buy paintings for me, and then I kind of got bored painting those because it just seemed like I was doing repetitive writing, you know what I mean? And then one day I remember I had this little room I was painting in, and I wanted to. I said, hey, you know what? I'm going to paint over this thing. It looks boring. So I started painting over it, and I was talking on the phone to somebody, and I remember like I started buffing it out black, but then I remember it was all lettering, just lettering going back and forth, and I remember I painted black over it, and then I stopped. I took a break or whatever, but I looked at it, and I remember I saw the lettering, but the black was covered. Not all of it was there, so some of it was coming out. I go, that looks pretty cool. I wonder if I should do something on that, on what's ever left on that. And then I remember my teacher said, you know what, one of your assignments is to, she put it bluntly, you should fuck up 10 paintings. Like whatever you're doing on your stuff, fuck it up. That's her exact words. And I go, well, here's a perfect example, because I just jacked up a commission right here that I spent time putting all this lettering, and then I buffed over it. So what I did was I just freed my mind, and I just got a brush out, and I remember it was kind of liberating, because I call it spiritual language, because it was kind of like automatic painting.
Sure.
It was unstructured, and it was basically no lettering. I just freed my mind, and I just let my hand go.
So movement.
Movement, yeah, pure movement. And it was crazy, because I remember like the night after, I was up late, I couldn't sleep, and I was watching this documentary. It was like one of those short stories things where they showed these people that were lost at sea, and they were dying. Like they were like, and then every time someone died, they had to throw them overboard. But this one girl was like, she was close to death, but she started speaking in tongues, and then because I guess she was delirious and she was getting close to death. They were like, once she started speaking in tongues, she was ready to go. So then she died, and they put her over. But that kind of stuck in my head, because she was just speaking to the spirit.
Sure.
So then the show after that was a show about this girl that got abducted by aliens. You know what I mean?
Okay,
I mean,
yeah.
it's supposed to be a true story, but I don't know if it's,
Okay.
But this girl came up missing. She was in her room. They heard her like scream or something, and then so they went up to check on her, missing. You know what I mean? Missing. Called the cops, obviously. So they canvassed the area and everything, and they were like, "What? Oh shoot!" So they thought, you don't know what happened. So she ends up appearing again. You know what I mean? Back in her room. They were like, "Wait, where'd you go?" And they were like, "No, they took me." She kind of explained to her, but they said the weird thing after that, she started doing these weird drawings, and they were like, what I was doing, like, they called it automatic writing,
Okay.
and I was like, I was just doing that shit. So I was like,
You got abducted by aliens.
yeah. So I took that painting, and then I took it to class, and I was like, yeah. And then I articulated, I go, yeah, this is the obliteration of the letter form. It's like speaking in tongues. So I went counter of the structure. I went anti-structure.
So it's very curious. It reminds me of what I've heard some musicians talk about when asked where do they get the lyrics to the songs. Like how do they do it? They're like, it just hits me.
Yeah.
We don't know where it comes from. It happens. We all of a sudden we hear it, and we just try to write it down as fast as possible.
Yeah.
So that we could capture it. So it's like they channel it from somewhere, right? And so it sounds like you also kind of like become a bit of this conduit.
Yeah, like a conduit or a vessel.
Yeah.
Because it started getting strange, because once that became my style, I started like how do I contain this beast, or how do I control it, or what do I do? And I started realizing the more I let go, the more naturally it flowed. It was pretty much I have to reach this flow state, so I never have a plan before I get anywhere. I'm just like, I have to trust my instincts. And then I would have problems sleeping, and then it was crazy. I would have these lucid dreams, almost where I wake up like a mid place, and I would see these like almost holograms, these light hieroglyphics. It was weird, man. You know what I mean?
Still, does this still happen
Yeah, it
to you?
still happens. Yeah, still
That's wild.
happens. Yeah, so I would see these holograms, and that's part of my dreaming. But they're like lucid dreams,
Yeah.
where I wake up and I'm conscious and I see this like hologram. So that's how strange it gets sometimes. So I don't know what I'm channeling.
I don't know. I don't know. Another dimension.
Maybe, yeah,
Maybe.
maybe.
So you're enter into this flow state,
Yeah,
and that's how you approach all your paintings now.
yeah, pure flow state. Yeah,
Murals the same way.
mural, same thing. Yeah,
It's incredible.
You can watch the videos.
Incredible.
Yeah, I just go right.
And so sometimes words come out.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah,
So
yeah.
it's a
A lot of
mix.
times there are words because sometimes people. I'm there at the time and I'm just talking to people and they'll break out a word and trip out on how I write it. So it's all it's very light. You know what I mean? It's very light because sometimes like that's one thing great about graph. It's very it's very unscripted. And especially when you're doing a mural.
How has it been received? Right? You started off, I guess learning this, challenging yourself to learn this and study and get this discipline.
Yeah.
Then you unlock
Yeah.
this flow state.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you go from that and the knowing of it to then actually showing your work in galleries? How did you make that leap, that next leap, and sharing the work?
I think a lot of times we got a couple early group shows. You know what I mean? That's usually how most people start. They'll get a couple group shows, and I was in a few group shows, and then it kind of snowballed from there. I mean, and then I got into that graph mode where I wanted to hit everything in sight and just
Okay.
be prolific. Because that the art. Once you get into the art world, it's more about being contained and rarity and all that. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Once you get into
You don't want to overproduce.
yeah, you don't want to overproduce. You don't want to. But then I was like, man, I'm gonna wreak havoc. I'm gonna do murals everywhere. If I go to Miami, I'm gonna hit everything. Just like this. I'm gonna
Right. You're
just go
still
crazy.
hungry. You're still
Yeah,
a writer.
So I mean, so that's a graffiti. So it's just like then there's people that save hard-earned money to buy a piece or get a mural, and you respect that, because they're just not buying it for an investment or something. And then, and I think if they shut the world down for 5 days, I would go hit everything I can. You know what I mean? Just because, you know what I mean. And it's a fine line. Like I'm kind of anti this art world because it's so contained, and they want things to be rarefied, contained,
It's rigid.
documented, this, that, and the third, which is cool. It's understandable from a business point of view, but then we also have the nature of the beast, the graffiti artist in us, that this is where it came from.
Yeah, the art world has a hard time dealing with graffiti.
Yeah.
Because of because of that mindset.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, it's hard to contain. It's hard to understand these writers that have these different
Yeah.
norms, these different rules.
And then you
that
had
don't
dudes like,
necessarily apply.
yeah, you had dudes like Basquiat, right? One of the most highly collected, and he used to have parties, leave the money inside of books, and then write on everything that everybody brought to him.
Yeah,
clothes,
junk, anything, whatever.
You brought a bra that he wrote on it. That's
But he had that mindset.
he had
as
that
well.
mindset. Yeah, that
Right.
mindset.
He don't care. You guys could
Yeah.
figure it out. The art galleries could try to figure it out. He's
Yeah.
just living. He's doing his thing.
Yeah, and then that's what I think too. Because sometimes I think this is all a simulation, right? It's like a movie. You know what I mean? Like you die empty.
Yeah. Right. But you want to break the system in a way.
Yeah, die empty. You know what I mean? Like that's what I mean. Like you can run a museum, you can be in shows worldwide, and then you'll still see a cat piece like down the
Right.
street.
It's all of it.
You know what I mean? Or a tag.
Yeah.
I see it. You know what I mean? So that's the beauty of it. It's the
One
nature
of the things that you mentioned in the group shows that I want to get back to is looking at you guys from the East Coast and the moves you guys are making on the West Coast.
Yeah.
I saw solidarity. I saw brotherhood
Yeah.
with you guys coming up in the graffiti days, but also as you guys move to the gallery, at least in your crew.
Yeah.
Because I saw you doing shows, then I would see, maybe in some of these group shows, Prime,
Yeah.
and other cats, and it was something that, I found to be very respectable. that people would still link up after all these years and come up together and not be scared of the competition or, or you know, who's fancier than who or who's going to make money.
Yeah.
It seems like everybody was aware that there's enough for everybody.
Yeah, and that's the mindset too. If you're from a crew, it's a family. You know, you want to see your crewmates win. I want to see graph writers win in general. You know what I mean? When you see somebody that comes from our background and you know, because we are breaking the system. That's what it is. Kill the system. K2S. You know, it's there's a system in place, and we are counterculture to a certain degree. You know what I mean? So, you know, with those roots, that being said, I mean, it's refreshing to see anybody come up.
How have you been seeing it? Have you been seeing a change, you know, from, you know, when you first started painting on canvas and moving to that direction till today? Is it breaking through? Are we making a dent?
You know what? It's you know, I see everything as inconsistent though, right? You know what I mean? And I think every artist has to generate their own energy. You know what I mean? Because as a whole, you'll see bright spots here and there, and then but it's about the energy the individual artist pushes. You know, once you get into that realm.
Yeah, it's a personal journey.
Yeah, it's a personal journey at that point. You know, and then I mean, not to be that I'm not too conscious, but once you start focusing on your art, sometimes it's better not to look at everything that's around you, because it's almost like, you know, you're looking at everything but not doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Right.
You
Just
know,
focus on your own.
Yeah,
path.
it's like if you're going to get in shape, you don't want to watch all these workout videos and not work out. You got to work out more than you watch, you know, watch a little bit, get some game, and then work out, you know. But it's kind of the same concept, I think. That's just my personal view, though.
No, I hear you. So another question, and just think, you know, you've created so much work for so long, right? You've been painting for decades.
Yeah. 40-something years.
40-something years. Do you have a painting that comes to mind, a mural that comes to mind, or something that comes to mind that was like, this is a magnum opus, this is one of my favorites and one of the best things that I've ever painted?
Absolutely not.
Incredible.
You know why? Because it's strange, because you know how, like, I see the holograms or whatever, I come back and look at these murals and I don't remember doing them sometimes.
Whoa.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't, like, I'll look at it like, damn, I just did this whole floor right here, or, you know what I mean? And I just, like, it's just like, you know, it's like an out-of-body experience sometimes. And then
Right, it sounds like you're not entirely conscious or present when you're doing it.
Yeah, yeah. I remember there was times too where, you know, you paint until you're physically exhausted, you know, where you're just like, you're seeing double and everything like that, and pushing through that you know, that paradigm or whatever, that paradigm shift, and it's crazy. So, you know, maybe that's why I shut it down. I kind of just move on, and it feels like, man, I don't remember doing that. You know, it's crazy. You know?
It's a really interesting sort of approach and I guess method.
Yeah.
That you're dealing with.
Yeah, definitely different. Yeah. So like I said, there's no like, I remember this piece and it just took me to the next level. I'm like, nah, the count goes back to zero every time I do something.
So wild.
The count goes back to zero.
I love that. I mean, I think it keeps it, for you, maybe it keeps it fresh. It keeps it like that unknown aspect of it.
Yeah, exactly. The unknown aspect. And then, you know, at the end of the day, you can't take nothing with you when you depart from this world. You know what I mean? You know what, you know, sometimes even to be broke and hungry, you're more dangerous. You got nothing to lose. And if you're functioning under that do or die, you're dangerous as an artist, as a human being, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes when you got nothing to lose, you know, if they give you everything, you don't have hunger anymore. So sometimes it's good to take some L's, regroup, reassess, and move forward.
You know, one last question, something that comes to mind, you know, hearing you say that you're hungry and take some L's and all this stuff, and, you know, reminds me of you having this sort of competitive side of you.
Yeah.
But it also makes me think of you and seeing you online sometime posting yourself as jiu-jitsu, you know, training and fighting. How much of that is part of your life these days?
I mean, not as much. I mean, I still train and stuff, go to open mat and stuff like that, and I hit the mitts and lift weights and run. And I mean, I like to keep the sword sharp, you know. I mean, obviously, when you get older, you don't want to get injured as much. I broke my hand, my fingers, and that's not good for art, right? You know what I mean? So that's kind of like our breadwinner. But, you know, martial arts has always been a part of my life. You know, I've been training judo when I was very young, you know, stuff like that. So it's always been, and then it's crazy too, because if you think about jiu-jitsu, you want to reach that flow state. And when I paint, I kind of emulate that too. You know, when we flow roll, it's kind of like these moves, and they're kind of in sync or whatever. You know,
It's just nature. It's just
nature. Yeah. So I kind of see jiu-jitsu and everything too in life too. You know, you have a hard training session. It's like, you know, when we're out there, I can imagine when you guys are painting on trains and stuff like that, there's so many outside factors that you got to worry about. You know what I mean? And that's kind of how jiu-jitsu is. You know, you got this force coming at you, and then you got to combat it, you know. And it's gentle art, you know.
Yeah. So you're art on multiple levels.
Multiple levels.
On all levels.
On all levels. Try to be.
Try to be. Well, I mean, it's, I think, for all of us, to be able to survive.
Exactly.
It takes a deep understanding of life.
Yeah.
And the more that you're in the struggle and the survival, the more you learn, you adapt.
Yeah, and then, you know, you need these moments of destitute too to change and evolve, because I mean that's what life is duality. It's dark and light, you know, and especially graph. We come from the shadows, you know, and then sometimes we hit the light. But it's like Icarus too. You can't get too close to the light, or we're gonna burn. You know, that's the self-destructive nature of graffiti too. You know, so he's seen a lot of that too. You know, so
yeah. I just want to say, you know, give shout outs. You know, before you mentioned that we've lost a lot of brothers and sisters in this journey, a bunch.
Yeah.
And you know, Dream popped into my head.
Tag Dream.
Yeah. You know, someone that would see up in Los Angeles so much.
Yeah.
And was such a good dude.
Yeah, good dude, man.
Dream. You know. Yeah. But yeah, a lot of our brothers are not here. So shout out to him. And I also I saw a post today from that Charlie put up about Dello.
Yeah.
You know, I remember him also
Dello,
from the old days.
Yeah, he was dope, man. Because one thing about Dello, what impressed me about him was, you know, people used to walk around with black books, and he had a big black book, and then he would do entire pages, like, you know, like burners, basically. You know, like, I'm like, whoa, you know, incredible artist.
Yeah, he was an incredible. He did a couple of my black book back in '88. Dedicated.
Dope ass name too, Dello.
Dello's a dope name, and then he started writing Monk.
Monk, that's right.
As well.
Changed.
Rest in peace, Dello, and rest in peace, Dream, and everybody else.
Yeah.
But DEFER, thank you so much,
Matt. Thank you
for your time today, for breaking it all down and sharing your history.
Much appreciated.
It's appreciated on our side.
Yeah.
Everybody that's out there listening, thank you so much for joining us today for the Museum of Graffiti's Oral History podcast and learning about DEFER's life and his art. Thanks to Modelo for sponsoring us, and we'll see you next time. Peace.
Peace.